All right. We have attendees, Dr. Tremblay, so if you want to do a brief introduction while I get Facebook set up, that would be great.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and we're just going to get set up here to get started for webinar number 6. And so we're waiting for still one of our interpreters to join us this morning, and hopefully they'll be along shortly. And so, Rochelle, am I good to go with the full?
I just need 1 minute to set up Facebook. So give me 1 second.
Sure. Thanks, everybody, for your patience this morning.
Bom dia a todos, obrigado por estarem aqui mais uma vez. Nós só estamos esperando alguns minutinhos para o nosso intérprete de espanhol estar aqui e nós vamos estar começando daqui a pouco, gravando no Facebook.
I'd like to thank our interpreters for being with us this morning. Giuliani, who just said hello to you. We hope that Mauricio will be joining us shortly for Spanish interpretation. And Lena and Olivia, who are here providing American Sign Language interpretation this morning. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for being with me.
Eu gostaria de estar agradecendo os nossos intérpretes por estarem aqui conosco, principalmente a nossos intérpretes de línguas de sinais que estão fazendo um ótimo trabalho aqui para a gente, e espero que o Maurício, nosso intérprete espanhol, possa estar nos juntando rapidamente.
Okay, the Facebook is set up, so you are good to go. And if and when Mauricio joins us, I will just interrupt you and add him if that's okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Great. So good morning, everyone, once again, and thanks for joining me this morning.
Mais uma vez, bom dia para todos. Obrigada por estar aqui mais uma vez.
And we will be interested to see who's joined us this morning. So we're going to launch a poll now to see if you're requiring translation or interpretation services this morning.
Nós gostaríamos de saber quem está aqui conosco essa manhã, então nós estaremos lançando essa enquete para poder saber se nós vamos estar precisando de intérpretes ou não.
And our session this morning is going to be recorded, so if you have a need to watch it in the future or to have a reference point, you can always come back to it at a later date.
A nossa reunião essa manhã vai ser gravada, mas somente ela vai ser gravada em inglês. Caso você precise assistir mais tarde, você terá essa possibilidade de assistir ela, mas somente em inglês.
Okay, we're going to launch the interpretation now. And we'll get started.
Nós vamos estar iniciando a área de intérprete agora para a gente poder começar.
Sorry, Bob, just 1 second. Let me turn this on for you. Okay. Should be all set.
Great, so the interpretation is now made available. You can select that icon and we'll get started. I'm going to give, if you've been joining these sessions, this may be your 6th session where you've been following along, and the information may have evolved over those sessions. And so for those of you who are joining for the very first time, it's my pleasure to welcome you. And so again, thanks for joining us this morning. My hope today is to provide an update on where we are today, and which may be some progress since the last time I talked to you last week, and where we're headed with next steps relative to the reopening of school, which is a question for many, certainly in every community in the Commonwealth and probably everywhere across the United States at this point. And so let me just begin by saying where we are today with respect to the submission to the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so, you know, back in July, we had to submit an initial plan, which provided that the district had considered 3 options: a full in-person option in school, a full remote option, which would be students learning from home, and a hybrid option, And so we had to present those three. And the reason for that is to allow districts to be able to pivot between them, depending on the circumstances around coronavirus and whether or not there was a need to close a school, which might require teaching and learning to happen in a fully remote environment. Or if the case count were down, it may allow for instruction to happen full in person. Very few districts are actually able to accomplish a full in-person experience, and for a variety of reasons, unless the districts are smaller and have available space to allow for the appropriate distancing. It would be very difficult to do that. So Framingham is not able to come back full in-person because of those safety guidelines. We're not able to meet the social distancing requirements. And so as a result of that, you know, our we're leaning toward is a hybrid model. On August 10th, that was later shifted to August 14th in terms of a deadline to the department, was basically the back to school plan. So what you were contemplating in July now transitions to what is actually the plan for the coming school year. And so districts have until Friday to submit their plans. We've submitted Framingham's plan, which is really exactly what we've been talking about all along the way, is a graduated hybrid model. And Framingham, in fact, came out fairly early relative to other districts about what model was to be put forward. So the Framingham School Committee voted in a 6-3 vote to move forward with a graduated hybrid model. Now, let me say that that's really not an option as far as the DESE check boxes go. And so what's meant by that is on the recommendation of the city's Department of Public Health, the thinking was to start remotely in an abundance of caution and then to graduate into a hybrid model. So many districts around Framingham, I don't know if I can say most of them, but many certainly are in a hybrid model to start the school year, which means teachers are back to school, students in some capacity are back to school in person, while others are going to be having a remote learning experience. And we expect that Framingham will follow suit, but likely later than other school districts based on this graduated model. There is a priority, of course, as we've discussed, to bring back some students earlier, particularly our students who are with disabilities or who have been identified as high need. And so a lot of what our plan prescribes is now subject to conversations and discussions with various bargaining units. And so we have a number of them in Framingham. We have a teachers association, we have an administrators association, and those are governed, the FTA, for example, the Framingham Teachers Association governs much of the bargaining for many of the units, secretaries, paraprofessionals, custodians, kind of all fall under that umbrella, if you will. And so a lot of what is in the plan is very high level with some recommendations. And we are now engaged in dialogue with our unions to get to the precise plan. And that will be communicated out as we work through these negotiations. And so what do I mean by that? There's terms to be defined around safety. What does a safe reopening mean? How will we know when we've achieved it is a question that's important. We have a number of safety protocols and that's all laid out in the plan. Again, a lot of the questions that you may ask, I'm happy to address this morning, but I would also encourage you to check out the plan that's been made available on our website. It's now, the plan that was submitted is now available there for you with more recent updates. Again, there's more iterations to go, more revisions to go with this plan, and we'll continue to provide those updates as well. But I would encourage you to take the time to really dig into that plan to understand the many details there. But again, happy to answer questions this morning, which we'll move on to briefly. But again, the point of a safe return to school, what does that mean in terms of air purification, filtration systems, all the details around being COVID-19 compliant. We as a district are code compliant with our facilities. I'm currently sitting in room A7 at Fuller Middle School, which is formerly a tech shop in here. They've, cleared out some of the woodworking, most of the woodworking materials, but this is what I'm calling home for now, and we're putting information out about that, about where you can find our district offices. We don't have visiting hours set up for these. We're still very much working in a remote fashion ourselves in terms of visitation. but we'll continue to communicate those updates as well. But our schools are, and from my view of this, and based on the checklist we have from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary Secondary Education, in our conversations with our Buildings and Grounds Department, are certainly code compliant. We're trying to one up that, of course, or more, and make sure that our schools are truly as safe as they possibly can be, with the best ventilation, filtration systems, making sure there's appropriate screens and windows to allow for fresh air, and all of these steps that are being taken in anticipation of us returning to school in some fashion, in an in-person experience. But we've got to get to some agreement on what safety is and what safety means and what a safe return is. And so that's spelled out in the plan. And that's an ongoing conversation that we're having now with our various bargaining units. Also, we need to define what remote is. And this has come up, and we understand remote learning to be, when, at least from the student view, where students are someplace that's not at school. Similarly for teachers, remote is, a conversation that we're taking place now is around, the plan has laid out an ideal of teachers coming back to school, being in their classrooms. And as you may have followed some of the conversation on this, we are hearing from teachers, we're hearing from these, the concerns around what that means, and feelings of safety, or the willingness to return to school. So this is a conversation that we're trying to work through with a teleworking policy. So I'm encouraged to report out that we are looking at that as a possible option for us. And so that's an ongoing conversation we're having with our Teachers Association. And so I don't have a lot of updates there, except that I want to acknowledge for the community that we are looking at teleworking solutions that would afford some of the same benefits to our staff as you would have for students. Again, the whole idea, though, is that we do come back to school at some point, and a lot of the intention behind returning our staff to school is to do that in some time, and whether it's in August or it's in early September or whenever that point may be, that we want to have our staff back in our facilities prior to the return of any students. And so that's a point of conversation.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but Bernardo is going to join us to help with the Spanish. So I'm going to stop the interpretation for just a minute, and then I'll turn it back on. Okay, so I apologize for the interruption. All right, so I'm going to end, and then I'll restart it.
Perfect.
In español.
And Bernardo, good morning, and thank you for joining us. Bernardo heads up our translation and interpretation department, so we went right to the top this morning to provide services. So, Bernardo, if you don't mind just interpreting that for
Bernardo, soy yo. Hola, buenos días. Soy el director del Departamento de Traducciones de las Escuelas Públicas de Framingham. Sentimos que en estos primeros minutos no haya habido interpretación de español, pero bueno, ya está solucionado. Muchas gracias.
All right, so just 1 second.
Está ajudando.
Sorry, guys. All right, I'm going to start. Hopefully this will work. Okay, do you want to give it a test? Bernard, yep. Okay, we're good to go. I'm going to mute myself and you can carry on.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And thank you, Bernardo, for joining Giuliani this morning to provide Spanish translation. You know, we really strive to make this accessible to all of our community. So I can't thank you enough for being here this morning. And Rochelle, thanks for behind the scenes for scrambling to make that happen this morning. Things come up, things happen, and thanks for making that work for us this morning. And so as I was saying, just to pick up from there, I do want to get to the questions portion of this and use the balance of the time for that, just giving some updates around what remote means and the conversations that are ongoing about that. And so that will continue and working with our educators to ensure that everyone is safe and that we can eventually get our students back in our classrooms. Recently, you may be aware the governor put out a metric, because a lot of the reopening question is, when is it safe to then bring students back? And this is happening community by community. The conversations we're having today are happening, to be sure, in every community that surrounds us. So fortunately, we do have metrics now that are based on the number of cases on average per 100,000. And so Framingham, and it's done in a color coding system. If you're not familiar with this, we'll make this this illustration available on our website as well. that had come out from the governor in recent days. But basically, it's like, as you'd expect, a traffic light kind of a system where you have red, yellow, green, and then there's an unshaded area. And what it means is that if you were, say, in the unshaded area, you would have less than 4 cases on average in a given period of time. Again, I think it's based on a week at a time is the review period, and which means that you would come back full in person, and that would be the ideal. Most communities are somewhere in between that non-shaded. I think that's where you get to ultimately with a vaccination. The red case is when you have 8 or more on average, would be putting you or school districts into a fully remote environment. And again, this is the metric that guides the state on this. There could be will be local decision making with local boards of health around that. That's one metric to be used, but it does provide some level of consistency across the state. And that's really important because up until having that sort of state issued guidance, it left localities to make those determinations. So we worked hand in hand with our city's Department of Public Health, with Dr. Wong, has guided us through this and has done a remarkable job, in my view, of keeping us informed and keeping our community safe. And in Massachusetts on the whole, the numbers tend to be better than other places in the country. And so we'll hope those trends continue. But in any event, we're going to continue to watch those trends. The graduated hybrid model that I've referenced fits squarely within not only the grid that's been presented by the governor, but relative to the number of cases that are happening. And I don't know today's case count, but on average, it puts Framingham at or about into that yellow, from the green right into that yellow category. Again, thinking about this as a traffic light. And so if you're in this green, or rather in the yellow or the red, it does put you into a remote option. So having a graduated model that starts remote is really, I think, spot on for Framingham relative to the direction from the governor and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So we'll continue to monitor that. However, because we're in the yellow, it does allow for hybrid, frankly, right away. And so there's been some question that I've seen in emails as well. If you're in the yellow and the case count by the governor's grid and the Department of Public Health puts you in a space where you can begin remotely, why aren't we? And so that's a different conversation, because we've made an agreement. The school committee voted this plan on the recommendation of the Department of Public Health to start remotely. And so that is the plan that was voted upon, and that's how we're going to begin. That said, though, we can begin to evaluate when the hybrid would begin. And so the plan that's been submitted, you'll see, has specific benchmarking dates or checkpoints, which would tell us when the first, when a return to school in some fashion would happen. And so all of this is currently under discussion with various bargaining units to now finalize. So I really can't comment too much beyond that, except to say we're trying to nail down when hybrid specifically would begin, provided that it meets those safety conditions. And that's the first threshold, is meeting the safety conditions for a safe return to school. So that's where we stand today with the governor's update, with the submission of the plan from Framingham specifically, and then conversations around the details of that plan and how instruction will look. Those are all still ongoing, and hopefully it can be wrapped up before school begins on September 16th. And that is the first day of school for students, is September 16th. That will be a remote start to the school year for students. And so you can just plan accordingly for that. So I'm grateful that I also have Amy Kane, who's my executive assistant, who's joined us behind the scenes today as well, and to help with the question prompt, taking questions that are on the Facebook chat. We're streaming this Facebook Live, and also through the Zoom webinar chat, and she'll be putting forward those questions. So I've not seen those, so I'm not distracted as I'm talking with you. So I'll ask Amy just to whether they're comments that I'll share with you, or they're questions that I can try to answer. Again, my disclaimer here is that there may be specific questions to be asked that I can't answer, because we're discussing that with the Teachers Association. And if that's the case, I'll let you know. And if I can answer the question, I will. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that too. And we'll have to get back to you through a Q&A document. And so once again, thanks for joining me this morning. I hope these are helpful. These which is really, in my view, a great opportunity for two-way engagement, and ask the questions that are on your mind, whether they're related to this or anything about school. This is just a great opportunity, I hope, to improve communication between the school department and our families. So Amy, if you're back there and you have some questions in the prompt, I'll let you take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Tremblay, you can hear me, right?
Loud and clear, thanks.
Great. So the first question, how does the new DESE guidance regarding the level of risk to communities impact the return to school, if at all?
Right, so I don't know if that question came while I was making the comment about the DESE guidance. It does impact quite a bit. I assume this is referring to the metric. And so we have to evaluate that metric relative to the case count, the number of active COVID-19 cases in a community. There may be other local considerations, because as you may read that guidance, it's subject to also not only the state's numbers, but also local guidance, because there could be things that are happening in Framingham that are different than, say, Ashland or Hopkinton or other communities that surround us. So that guidance is really very important, especially as we get to those benchmarking dates, the first of which is in September, and we'll look at the number of case counts, and again, we do this in partnership with the Board of Health. Did I get that? Is that the right? I want to make sure I answered the question correctly, Amy. So hopefully that's what was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The next question has to do with kindergarten. Since kindergartners can't be still in front of a computer for too long and don't know how to be students, is the district considering in-person outside learning only for kindergarten like other mass districts are doing?
Yeah, so I think it's being referred to here with this question is there are some districts that have prioritized the return to school for the early childhood grades. Take Waltham as an example, and maybe that's where it's coming from. So pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, first grade tend to be, these sort of early childhood grades. And so some districts have prioritized early childhood as a full return to school. This plan does not do that. However, we are looking at ways to engage, talking again with the FTA. So the FTA again refers to the Framingham Teachers Association, and that the FTA encompasses a number of bargaining units within it, including teachers, paraprofessionals, secretaries. There's a lot of various bargaining units that fall under that. So if I refer to the FTA discussions or negotiations, that's what I mean by that. And so we're looking at a number of days. The Department of Elementary Secondary Education, the DESE, has allowed for 10 days at the start of the school year, largely to be dedicated for preparation for the school year, whether that's making sure teachers have the training they need for remote learning and teaching. As we talk about anti-racism training for our staff, these are days that can be dedicated for that work. And I'm also hopeful that we can use some of the time of those days. Again, this is subject to discussions with the FTA. I'd like to see us in a space where we could use some of those early days to engage with families. What that could look like, teachers could be outside, say under a canopy, keep the sun out or something like this, and we could have families that are brought to school to connect them with Chromebooks. We could inquire to make sure they have the necessary bandwidth at home for internet access. Many of our departments are preparing kits, whether those are for visual, fine and performing arts, or they're for science labs, or any number of areas where our educators are envisioning what a take-home package might look like, if you will. This could be disseminated. I also see an opportunity where we could leverage our bus drivers and our school buses to make sure that families can get to our schools to have that initial contact. Not all at the same time, but in some graduated scale where families could come in small numbers, one at a time, meet the teacher at an appropriate social distance, have at least that first set of contact and eye-to-eye communication in person, making sure that the resources are available. So that's what I'm hopeful. I don't know exactly how that will look yet. It's not entirely the Bob Tremblay plan to be rolled out. This is a conversation that will be one that's, I hope, collaborative and that we can put out in a way that meets teacher needs, addresses the safety concerns that have been raised, and also helps families to have their child make that first connection to school with their teacher. And I do understand the complications for kindergarten. This is the first entry into public education, into school, and that first day of school is a significant one. So we are taking that very seriously. And it's at every grade level. Kindergarten tends to be one that comes to mind as being particularly important, as this is often a difficult transition for parents more than it is for kids, frankly, as their young ones, their 5 and 6 year olds, go off to school for the very first time. So we are sensitive to that. Our educators have expressed that as well, and so we'll do all we can to make that that initial connection a powerful and meaningful one.
Thank you so much. We've had a number of questions about when will parents know the daily schedules?
So daily schedules will come up once we've identified really how the plan will look at various levels. So what I've mentioned now, and I wish I could be more concrete in these answers, and I know that if you're listening and watching, you're thinking the same thing, because I'd like to know these answers today. It's, it's August, 12th? And so we're just not there, but we have models of that are built, of what the schedules will look like. We certainly don't envision a situation where a child is in front of a computer 6 hours a day. But we do expect that the schedules will be a full day. Nothing will replicate the full in-school experience that happens from a variety of points, right, socially or academically. But we are trying to replicate this to the extent that we can, to give some normalcy of a schedule, and a start to the day, an end to the day. And so those schedules are being worked out right now. And we'll be able to share those again following conversations with the FTA. And hopefully we're meeting very regularly and for good long sessions. So I'm hopeful we can work through some of those details in the next week or two and be able to get back to families with updates. I do envision that as we zero in on a very specific schedule and how that relates to grade levels in schools, you'll be hearing that information from the various school principals that will make that much more localized to your child's school.
The next question is from Facebook. If there are teachers who are forced to stay home, either through medical leave or otherwise, will they receive the same professional development as teachers in the building?
Yes, I mean, the professional development is a subcommittee that's working through the details of what PD will look like for our educators, for all of our staff, whether that's in person or virtual or some combination of the two. But certainly, whether if a staff member is at home because they are under, either a teleworking policy has been approved, or there's an exemption for childcare or a medical reason, we will absolutely make sure that the accessibility is made available to all staff, regardless of where they're housed.
Next question is from the chat. Will classes be on a Zoom format with attendance being checked, the teacher actually teaching the information daily? And again, will morning attendance be taken?
Yeah, so this is different than we've used the term crisis learning from last spring. And so what's happening here is a much more, I guess, structured school day is the goal. The DESE has made it very clear to us that attendance matters. And so whether you're checking in on whatever platform, whether it's a Google Meet platform or a Zoom platform or through Canvas or whatever the platform happens to be that's ultimately decided upon, attendance matters. So students will be graded. The grades will be, we're not moving into a pass-fail any longer. It's really, the expectations are more like what school to be. How we structure the day, how we give appropriate breaks from screen time, whether it's synchronous, which is real-time in-person, virtual in-person like this, synchronous, or it's asynchronous, which may be watching a recorded session or a screencastify or something that's not in real time but made available. There's a combination likely of all of these things that will happen going forward. So again, more to come on that, but the expectation is there would be grades, attendance, and a structured school day.
This question is also from Facebook. When are the Chromebooks going to be rolled back out?
So we have enough Chromebooks for all of our children, whether they children choose to want them or not. They may have their own devices at home that they would prefer to use, but we do have enough devices to issue. So that's part of the conversation that's happening now with the FTA as to what days, and I'm talking with our technology team. They're eager and ready to have students come back and begin picking up their materials, and so that's an ongoing conversation. But we expect sometime, I would say, in the first week or two of September, if not sooner. But ideally, obviously, before the 16th of September, we have to get this into the hands of our students.
The next question is from the chat. What are the metrics you'll be using to determine if it is safe to move from one phase to the next? Are they tied to the public health data to air quality numbers?
So again, and I don't know if people are just joining or if their questions were from before. So I may be repetitive in my responses, but I want to make sure I don't miss an opportunity to answer questions and maybe provide clarification. So the DESE guidance now, the Department of Public Health through the governor's office has issued these metrics, this red, red, yellow, green, and unshaded chart that we'll be making reference to, and that's the number of positive cases on average relative to a population of 100,000. So whatever that number happens to be will indicate which portion of the grid that we're in, whether it's red, yellow, or green, or if it's an unshaded category. And so we will then look at that data, and we'll talk to the city's Department of Public Health and see how the city is guiding us on a return to school. And I say return to school, at this point I'm talking about a return to hybrid. I don't think anyone here is talking about a full return of all students to school anytime soon. I'll just be honest with you on that. The idea of putting students all back in the same space without having any kind of social distancing, I think until there's a vaccination, I think that's a dream. The reality is the hybrid is what we're talking about getting to, and starting remotely, and where that happens and when that happens is absolutely going to be critical by using the benchmarking data that we have. That data will be made available weekly by the state, will be reviewed weekly by the state, and we have identified benchmark dates in the back to school plan that we'll then evaluate based on those dates with that decision point, whether we start hybrid at that next scheduled date. That's not to say we're going to wait until those dates to review the data. We're going to review this daily as we do now, and then the weekly averages, of course, we'll review those as they're released from the state, and we'll just continue to watch it. We have to rely on the science of this as we make our determinations for a safe return, but it's not just the science; it's also subject to conversations that happen within bargaining units, and so there's another layer of this that people need to be aware of. It's not just what's happening with the metrics. There's other conversations that have to happen along the way. And so all of that is taken into consideration so that we can also give enough advance notice for families to make those adjustments for their own schedules for when their child is no longer at home all day long every day, but now coming to school on some days, however that's determined.
There are similar questions in the chat and on Facebook about, have you given any thought to a later high school start time during remote or later? Regarding, there have been numerous studies of teenagers and their sleep patterns. It's a similar question in Facebook.
Yeah, let me just say, for full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of a later start time for students. I mean, everything we've come to learn about circadian rhythms, this natural sleep patterns of adolescence, would suggest that we would do a whole lot better by our kids if we had them come to school later. In fact, I once asked a pediatrician that I was working with in a previous district about a late start, and that district ultimately moved to a late start. And I was talking with a pediatric neurologist, and I said, so in your view, what would be the ideal start time for, say, a 16-year-old? And you may be surprised to know that the start time ideally would be noon. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. although I'm sure many of our students would appreciate sleeping in. That said, though, a 7 a.m. start doesn't seem like it serves our kids very well. We've been in an institutionalized system that's largely driven by transportation, and it's difficult to kind of get out of that. That said, perhaps there's an opportunity here to be explored where we are in a remote environment. Can we make something happen at a later start? And certainly something I would like to discuss with our teachers. Bear in mind, too, that is the point I made earlier. The science is important to consider, and clearly the science is making known that circadian rhythms suggest a later start is best. But the reality here is that a lot of the decisions are not just relative to science, that there's agreements, there's conversations, there's bargaining, there's contracts that have to also be honored. And so we need to have those conversations and see what we can do. Perhaps there's some way to compromise on this and have do something for the months that we're out of school in a remote fashion, and then we'd have to necessarily shift, or do we? There's pieces at play with a later start. This is one of those areas where it'd be better if everybody did it. If you're in an athletic league, for example, and what districts that have had a later start, it's not simply starting later and ending the day. You couldn't just start the day, say, at 9 and still end the day when you traditionally would around 2 o'clock or so, because you've got to consider the requirement from the state on not only the this year 170 school days, typically 180 school days, but you also have time on learning requirements down to the specific number of hours. And so to accomplish a later start, you'd have to also accomplish a later end. And so it becomes a transposition of the day. And so let's say your day started at 7 and ended at 2, and you were to shift that to, say, starting at 9, you'd have to end at 4, right? It's a transposition to make those numbers happen. If you happen to have been in a district or in a district that has a longer school day that complies or that exceeds the required hours, and that's either 900 or 990 hours, depending on the grade level, you may be able to just scale back your school day and still meet the guidelines. In Framingham, we're right at the number. And so anything we would do to have a later start would mean a later ending. And so that certainly has impacts on sports. The times, what we don't want to do is be in a place where we're dismissing half of our students early to get to a practice or to a game if they're traveling to something interscholastic. And so this is what goes back to my point. It's a lot easier if the district or the state were deciding to do this on the whole. In previous conversations in a previous district, the lever here was working within school districts in the same league. So if you're playing in a sort of designated sports league, if everybody shifted their start and end time, it made that much more conducive. So not that sports or transportation should be the drivers. It should be the science. It should be we're building our school systems to meet student need. And clearly, in my view, and many, probably those who've raised the question, being responsive to what we know about the science and circadian rhythms would be an important step. So let's explore it. I'm not opposed to that. It does add a further complication into an already complicated return to school plan, but it's never going to be a great time to take it up for conversation. So let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Thank you. There are a couple questions in the chat regarding fall sports. Could you give an update on the situation with fall sports?
I wish I could. I can only tell you what the MIAA has reported out. The MIAA is the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association. That's the governing organization, if you will, of interscholastic sports in the Commonwealth. Right now, that date, as my understanding, still continues to be a sports season beginning September 14th. The reality of that date, though, I don't see it. We're still waiting on guidance from the Department of Elementary Secondary Education on that. I just don't see how you bring many of our sports together. If school districts are operating remotely, let's just use a football team, which tends to be a pretty known fall sport. How do you have students not coming to school because it's not safe, but yet coming on a football field and tackling, right? So it doesn't make sense, the safety around that. So what I don't know is what does that mean though for, and I really, I mean, I think we all hoped we'd be in a better place by now, and we're just, maybe we are to some extent, but we're not back to what normal school was like. Friday night under the lights, marching band coming on the field at halftime, and We have all kinds of challenges now around that and what, the typical school fall and what that feels like. So I don't know. There may be sports that are offered that allow naturally distancing, like take golf. I've used that as an example. One could see that a golf game could happen, and because of the natural distancing that happens. On the other hand, wrestling seems more problematic, right? So I think we have to take it case by case, sport by sport, and how those seasons are adjusted. And I know it's a tremendous letdown for our students and families. I have 3 children of my own, all of whom are athletes. And so I'm right there alongside of you, wondering what's going to happen with the fall season. So we just don't know yet, what the plan will be. September 14th, again, is the date. Bear in mind that many of our schools and surrounding communities are coming back, maybe not fully in person, but in a hybrid fashion. And so if they are coming back and students are in school, what does that mean for those school districts? Do they participate? But Framingham, being that it's fully remote to start, can't. These aren't clear to me yet. And so we're waiting on additional guidance that we hope have been in our hands by now. And I'll be watching for it. And as soon as I have the update, we'll make sure that information is available to our community.
The next question is from Facebook. Will Explorers offer childcare during remote learning?
They are offering the Explorers program. For those who don't know, is our school-based out of school time, before and after school program. Just a tremendous program, outstanding staff in this program, and they're working hard to see how they can fill some of the void. But bear in mind, they're also governed here in terms of the numbers of students they can see, the social distancing requirements, and what they can do in person. And there is no way that the Explorers program can fill the entire void of what's happening for our families and our staff. But they are looking to see about expanding as much as they can, to the extent that the guidance will allow. And also, we're working very closely with our community partners across the city to see where we can create additional opportunities for families and for children, so that there is some other kind of outlet besides being at home as we get ourselves closer, hopefully, to a hybrid return to school. And so we are looking to see how we can expand Explorers programming to the extent that we can, to do so safely.
There are a number of questions on Facebook regarding special education students, IEPs, 504s. One of them how will you deal with the IEP students who have been largely forgotten?
Yeah, I would just, make my initial comment to that would say, if I think forgotten, and I think that's coming from a place of frustration. If you're asking our staff and our team and our special education department and our educators, I would say that we're all in agreement that we haven't forgotten those students. I know how it may feel if you're the parent, though, to be feeling as though your child has been forgotten, and that's terrible, and that's something that we're not proud of. When we left school in March, we expected we'd be coming back in a few days. I think we all were there. We all lived the same world. And when the school year was closed and we had to pivot and figure out how to function in a remote environment, that made it hard for a lot of our families. I'll acknowledge it made it particularly difficult for students with disabilities who need that in-person support and education. And we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that the students weren't forgotten, but we indeed did a disservice as a result of that. And I don't think it's anybody's intention to have done that. It was the circumstances. However, going forward, we have an opportunity in front of us to make this better and perhaps make this right. And so there's a number of, talking with our special education department, the students on IEPs, on 504s, students, the number of students who are homeless, who've not had education made available to them in large part, who've not been supported in large part, who've not had the needs met that they are entitled to and deserve. That has got to be the continued priority. And in fact, in our proposal, bringing students back, starting in really in early October is the plan, if not sooner, to start working with students who have identified as high needs. Many of whom are, not all of whom, but many of whom are on IEPs and who have with the severest of disabilities to work with our students there. And so that is the priority. We have to work that through with the Framingham Teachers Association, with the FTAs I've mentioned, to talk about those start dates, when that can happen. But right now, the services would be delivered remotely. Meetings would happen remotely. We do need, in short order, to start getting testing done, though, as we have, initial evaluations and making sure that we get students who are identified or who need to be identified for individualized educational programs. That testing has to happen, and that testing has to happen in person. There's not really a way around that, given the way that the testing is structured. And so we're working that through again with the FTA to see about what are the appropriate start dates to begin those efforts. And again, it goes back to the earlier point of determining that it's safe to do so. And so that safety piece is really a major hinge here to all these conversations. And that again is a conversation that we're having with the FTA to make sure that we've met the concerns that have been raised. And we'll have this document made available publicly as well for full transparency, whether it's, the upgrades of air filtration systems or air purification systems. We've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in upgrades and personal protective equipment, which is, referred to as PPE, with masks or gowns if needed, face shields to go along with masks. And we have all that in supply already in the district. So we're ready to go in that regard. And so we do recognize that our students with special needs, and we have prioritized students, particularly on IEPs. And again, I'm sorry if you feel that they've been forgotten. That's certainly not a place a school district wants to be, leaving a family to feel.
There are a few questions or comments in both Facebook and in the chat regarding students learning and interacting with teachers. Specifically, is there a plan to dismiss engagement and switch to accountability? Teachers only had 2 to 3 hours a week that students could chat or email them, and that was unacceptable. Teachers should be available all day as well as for extra help after school.
Yes, I think, again, last year we were in a crisis mode and we were trying to, all teachers, administrators, everybody was trying to figure out how to make school work in a way that school really hadn't worked unless you were in a virtual school environment. And so the idea was you'd have this, 3 hours a day, I think was the number that this was state guidance, by the way. Just to be clear, it wasn't our teachers saying, I only want to work a few hours a day. This is guidance that's coming very clearly from the department. In fact, there's, sorry, I'm going to take a quick drink here. In fact, there was some concern about standards not being moved forward or education not being moved forward. That was really at the direction of the state at the time, saying, we don't want you to move in advanced teaching and learning. Teachers were at the ready to do that, frankly. We had to put a pause on that because we weren't sure when we were coming back. The idea was to deepen the knowledge around standards that have been taught. Again, we were out in March, thought we'd be coming back in March. When that extended to the end of the year, it became problematic, and we obviously are noting the gaps in learning and having not completed full content. The move for next year going forward, and there's full agreement on this with our, I would say, with the FTA as well, is that we know that this needs to be a stronger, more robust model than what was offered in the crisis mode. And so we are envisioning full days. How those days specifically look, that's subject to bargaining, and that will be shared later. But to be sure, there's an expectation of teachers and students having regular connections with one another, full school days, not abbreviated or truncated school days, and more direct instruction, moving away from the resource calendars and activities as families may be familiar with from last spring. So this is really reconceptualized to be entirely different, where there's grades, there's attendance, there's a full expectation of teaching and advancing content learning in all the standards. Whether you can achieve that in true fashion, whether or not it's fair to test students on that with an MCAS test, those are some decisions that will be made beyond the school department, that will be made at the state level. And we'll wait for additional guidance on that from the commissioner. But this is expected to be a very different looking and feeling school year, even though it's remote in terms of expectations and accountability for both students and for staff. And again, our staff are up to that challenge. They were itching to go last spring, but we were having to harness that because the department was making very clear, although some districts did decide to just go off on their own and do what they did. And in fact, it created this very wide divide among students who had access and who were engaging with students who didn't have access and who weren't engaging. And so we spent a lot of time, and will continue to spend a lot of time, making sure that our students have that accessibility. That's really important. We have to make sure that who's on the receiving end, how well remote learning may work well for some. We understand it's done for safety reasons, but how well does it really work for a child who's homeless? How well does it work for a child who requires in-person care and services? And how do we accomplish that? These are difficult questions, and we're working really hard to answer that. But the expectation is that, generally speaking, this will be a much more robust model than the crisis learning that happened last spring.
This question is also from the chat. Will children and staff be tested before coming back to school?
So testing has increased. This is one of those gray areas for us. We're working with the Department of Public Health on this, not just children, but also for staff. To the extent, can you be requiring testing? Can you just suggest it? What do you do in the lag time between the time a test is taken and the results? And what happens if the results found that the staff member of the child happens to be COVID-19 positive? Then there's the contact tracing. Do you then close the school down? So there's lots of outcomes around testing that we don't know. We're just now starting to have increased access to testing centers. But if you've seen the one in Framingham with the line wrapped around the building, we're not quite there yet. And so we'll expect to get more guidance on that. I know this question has been raised with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education as well, to see about testing availability for students, for educators. And so that continues to be evaluated by the state. But it's a question that we're aware of.
With the start of the new year, will there be a review of the prior year? I feel like the last school quarter was a loss.
So the educators, one thing that's come out of the working in a virtual world is it's allowed us to better align and have conversations across the district, vertically and horizontally, in ways that hadn't happened before in face-to-face meetings, given the start and end times of our school day. And so there's been a lot of attention paid to the level of engagement, to the extent that we could actually quantify that, but the level of engagement and how far our educators are able to move along the curriculum. And again, this goes back to the earlier point that the DESE did ask us to sort of stop in our tracks, deepen learning that was of standards that had been taught. So we are aware of when that directive was given and what content may have been missed in that time out of school from March to June. And our Office of Teaching and Learning, and working with our educators to develop models, will do their very best to fill the gaps that have existed between March and the start of a new school year. So we're mindful of that. It's in every community. This conversation is happening. So yeah, we're gonna have to play a little bit of remediation work to get caught up from where we left off. Just to note the time, Amy, we're coming up on just about 9 o'clock, 8:59, and just I know we started a couple minutes late, so I'm happy to go to 9:05. So why don't we just plan to go about another 5 minutes or so, since we did have a later start, just to give a little bit more time for questions.
Great, thank you. This is from Facebook. Will the first 10 days be in person or remote for staff?
We are working that out with the FTA.
All right. This is from the chat. For parents opting for remote learning for the entire school year, what will the process be for notifying the school, and what will the timeline be for submitting that decision?
So in the coming days and weeks, we'll be likely sending out a variety of surveys to you. This is to staff and to families. it's going to be really important that you take the time to respond to those. I'm going to say that one more time. Whether you're a staff member being asked a question or you're a family being asked a question, whether it's related to your choice of or mode of learning, whether that's remote or it's hybrid, or the need for transportation, any of these questions, we need you to answer and be on the lookout for that. We're going to try to customize this as best we can for our 9,000 plus students and our 2,000 or so staff. In order to do that, we have to be working from accurate information. And so I just ask you, as you see surveys that come up, so we'll be soliciting that information in the coming days as well, so as we decide on which cohorts of students are going to be in coming which days and how that structure will look. We'll be asking families to respond to some of those questions. So be watching for more information on the survey about that.
Great, thank you. Sorry, had a little technical difficulty.
No, and I know that people don't necessarily appreciate all the questions that are coming in, I'm sure, and you're trying to grab the ones that are the most frequent and put them into a single question. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that, Amy. Thanks. And I think plus the couple minutes of silence gives our interpreters a break too. They've been working pretty hard.
Yes, they have. The question from the chat, the calendar shows no homework days. Should parents infer that in addition to the online schooling, we should plan for homework too?
Yeah. I think, homework is part of that, how that gets structured and what's assigned and when. Again, we're looking to get to a point of the calendar when it was designed, the no homework days were built in there as, assuming school's in session. And so these are nights where you'd have, they were envisioned to be and still are as family, friends, neighbors, time for fellowship with your family. We've had a lot of family fellowship time in the last few months. There's no question. We have pulled the first no homework day, which typically falls around the first couple of days of the school year, out of the calendar since there won't be school until the 16th. So that date wasn't relevant. The other dates are there and they do stand. So if the suggestion is those are no homework days, that would mean that there could be homework assigned on other days. Yeah, I mean, again, we're looking to get to is, let's stop using the word normal, but as a traditional school year and structure where a teacher would be teaching during the day and would no doubt give students homework assignments to be completed to ensure content understanding. So that would proceed as normal. And those no homework days would then also be days where there wouldn't be homework assigned.
I think we probably have to end on a positive note. This is a comment from the chat. I want to thank Dr. Tremblay for his transparency and ongoing communication. I have a friend in another district with a new superintendent, and the feedback has been, quote, we need a communication plan like Framingham has. Props to Tremblay and his team.
Yeah, thanks. And, I appreciate that. I'll acknowledge this too, that I wish I could give everybody the answer they want to hear. And I know that I can't. I know that this has unfortunately been divisive in a community that cares deeply about children and prioritize it. And it's upsetting every single day to come in and do this work and not be able to have concrete answers. But I just need to remind everybody that, and I appreciate that comment very much. Thank you for that. I'm trying my best. We are all trying our best as administrators, as teachers, to ensure our own safety, just like you would want to have yourself safe. At the same time that we know we have to care for our children, and we recognize that tremendous challenge too, and just try to balance all that in a way that's safe, and so that we don't spike in our own community while trying to get everybody back on track until there's a vaccination. So, I think we've all felt it, whether you're in traffic or at the grocery store, wherever you are in your walk of life, this virus has impacted you, whether it's a personal health impact, job loss, any number of challenges that COVID-19 has presented. I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that. This isn't easy for anybody. And for our families, I want to acknowledge that I know that every decision we make is going to have an impact on whether or not you can maintain a job that you need to provide for your family. And we take that very, very seriously. And this is all front of mind. Every night I lay my head on the pillow, I process this like all of you do. And I try to do the very best I can to keep our kids and our families and our staff and our administrators safe. And please know that it's going to be imperfect. There's no way I can give everybody the answer that they want to hear. I know that. And that's just the nature of the job. But know the context that is coming from a place of wanting to do right, wanting to keep everyone safe, wanting to support our families and our kids. And we'll just continue to keep doing the best we can. For now, my view is just this transparency through communications. Maybe it's repetitive. Maybe it doesn't give you answers. People have viewed it as it's just politics. I'm just giving political answers. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm not a politician. I'm in a job that's, right now, probably one of the more impossible ones to do. And I'm going to tell you what I know, when I know it. And if I don't know it, I'm going to tell you that too. So feel free to judge as you need to. I get it. But just know where I'm coming from with this and the intention behind the webinars. And I'm just trying to keep everybody informed as best I can. So again, I appreciate the comment. It's a tough spot to be in, to have a webinar where you don't have all the answers. I'd love to be able to offer that to you. And maybe one day I can. And maybe one day this will be behind us and we can all move ahead and think about something else. But thanks for being here with me this morning, for your attention, for your patience, flexibility. And I know that this is not easy for any of us. So thanks again for joining me this morning. My deepest gratitude also for Amy and Rochelle behind the scenes and the question prompts, and also for our interpreters who are making this accessible to our community. I'm really grateful to all of you for working so hard to help communicate this messaging. So thanks again. We'll provide updates as we can. I'm sure we're back at this in a week or so to give you even more updates. And I'm always available by email, and just keep us posted on what we can do to make this better for you time-wise. We're trying to accommodate most schedules. And again, thanks so much for joining me. Please be safe. And if your children aren't watching these webinars, tell them I said hello, and I look forward to seeing them back to school, hopefully soon, very soon. Have a good day, everybody.